Before there were gripping thrillers on Netflix or crime podcasts on Spotify, there was the unmatched storytelling of Agatha Christie, the queen of mystery. Through her timeless characters and cunning plots, she gave us Hercule Poirot, a detective whose sharp mind and methodical brilliance have captivated readers for generations. Today's story, The Tragedy at Marsdon Manor, is one of Poirot's earliest cases. Originally published in 1923, it's part of Poirot Investigates, a collection that laid the foundation for one of fiction's most iconic detectives. If you're enjoying these audio stories, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring these classic tales back to life. Now, let's journey into the quiet English countryside, to a grand old manor where a sudden death raises far more questions than answers. This is The Tragedy at Marsdon Manor. I had just returned to town after a short trip, only to find Poirot strapping up his small valise with his usual precision.
Ah, at last, Hastings. I was afraid you wouldn't be back in time to accompany me.
You're heading out on a case, then?
Indeed. Though I must confess, at first glance, it doesn't seem particularly promising. The Northern Union Insurance Company has asked me to look into the death of a Mr. Maltravers. Just a few weeks ago, he insured his life with them for the substantial sum of £50,000.
Yes. I leaned forward, curious.
As expected, the policy included the standard suicide clause. If he took his own life within a year, the premiums would be forfeited. He was examined by the company's doctor and deemed to be in good health, despite being slightly past middle age. But 2 days ago, Mr. Maltravers was found dead in the grounds of his Essex estate, Marsdon Manor. The cause of death: internal hemorrhage. Not alarming on its own. However, rumors about his failing finances have surfaced, and the company has confirmed he was on the verge of bankruptcy. That changes things. Maltravers had a young and attractive wife. Some now believe he scraped together all the cash he could to pay for the life insurance, so she'd be financially secure, and then took his own life. That's not unheard of. Still, my friend Alfred Wright, a director at Northern Union, asked me to investigate. I warned him I'm not too optimistic. If it had been heart failure, I'd have had more hope. Heart failure can often mean the doctor simply didn't know the real cause of death. But a hemorrhage? That's more definite. Nevertheless, let's make our inquiries. Pack your bag, Hastings. We'll take a cab to Liverpool Street.
Roughly an hour later, we stepped off a Great Eastern train at the small Marsdon Lee station. When we asked about Marsdon Manor, we learned it was just a mile away. Poirot chose to walk, and we made our way through the quiet main street. I said, "So what's the plan of action?"
First, we visit the doctor. There's only one in Marsdon Lee, Dr. Ralph Bernard. Ah, and here is his house.
The house stood slightly back from the road, a well-kept cottage with a brass nameplate at the gate. We walked up the path and rang the bell. We were in luck. It was his consulting hour, and no patient were waiting. Dr. Bernard, an elderly man with rounded shoulders and a vague, gentle demeanor, welcomed us. Poirot introduced himself and explained our visit, making it clear that, in such matters, insurance companies must investigate thoroughly.
Of course. I assume, given his wealth, the policy was for a large amount?
You consider him a wealthy man, Doctor?
The doctor looked surprised by the question.
Wasn't he? He had 2 cars. Marsdon Manor's a large property to maintain, though I believe he bought it quite cheaply.
I understand he had suffered serious financial losses lately.
Dr. Bernard only shook his head, sadly.
Really? In that case, it's fortunate for his wife that the insurance was in place. She's a beautiful, charming young woman, but emotionally wrecked by what happened. She's a bundle of nerves, poor thing. I've done my best to protect her, but of course the shock was inevitable.
Had you been treating Mr. Maltravers recently?
No, never. He was a Christian Scientist, or something along those lines.
But you examined the body?
Certainly. One of the undergardeners came to fetch me.
And the cause of death was clear?
Absolutely. There was some blood on his lips, but most of the bleeding was internal.
Was the body still in the same spot where he was found?
Yes. It hadn't been moved. He was at the edge of a small plantation. He must have been out shooting rooks. A small rook rifle lay beside him. The hemorrhage must have come on suddenly. It was a gastric ulcer, no doubt.
No suspicion he was shot.
My dear sir.
Forgive me, but I recall a recent murder case where the local doctor called it heart failure until the constable pointed out a bullet wound in the head.
Well, you'll find no bullet wounds on Mr. Maltravers. Now, gentlemen, if there's nothing more.
We took the hint and stood.
Good morning, doctor. Thank you for answering our questions. Just one last thing. No autopsy was needed?
Certainly not.
The doctor turned red with indignation.
The cause of death was obvious. In my profession, we don't believe in distressing grieving relatives without good reason.
And with that, he shut the door firmly in our faces.
And what did you think of Dr. Bernard Hastings?
Bit of an old fool, I'd say.
Exactly. Your talent for judging character never fails, mon ami.
I glanced at him, unsure whether he was joking, but he seemed perfectly serious. Then, a mischievous twinkle appeared in his eye.
At least, when there's no beautiful woman involved.
I shot him a cold look. When we arrived at Marsdon Manor, the door was opened by a middle-aged parlor maid. Poirot handed her his card and a letter from the insurance company addressed to Mrs. Maltravers. She quietly showed us into a small morning room and went to inform her mistress. About 10 minutes later, the door opened and a slender woman dressed in mourning stepped in hesitantly. With a faltering voice, she confirmed Poirot's name. Poirot stood up at once, full of gallantry.
Madam, I regret deeply to disturb you in this difficult time. But what can we do? Business knows no mercy.
Mrs. Maltravers allowed him to guide her to a chair. Her eyes were red from crying, though her beauty was unmistakable. She appeared to be around 27 or 28, with delicate features, light blonde hair, and large blue eyes. She asked hesitantly if this visit had to do with her husband's life insurance, expressing that it felt too soon to be troubled with such things.
Courage, my dear madam, courage. You see, your husband insured his life for quite a large amount, and in such cases, the company must verify a few details. I've been authorized to handle this discreetly. I promise to make it as painless as possible. Would you kindly describe for me what happened last Wednesday?
She explained softly that she had been changing for tea when her maid came rushing upstairs. A gardener had just returned to the house with terrible news. She couldn't bring herself to say more. Poirot gently pressed her hand in understanding.
I understand. That is enough. You had seen your husband earlier that afternoon.
She said she hadn't seen him since lunch. She had walked to the village for stamps and believed he had been outside, wandering around the property.
Shooting rooks, perhaps?
She nodded, saying he usually took his little rook rifle and that she had heard a few distant shots.
And where is that rook rifle now?
She thought for a moment and said it should be in the hall. She then led Poirot to the weapon and handed it to him. He examined it briefly.
2 shots fired, I see. And now, madam, if I might see.
She turned away and quietly instructed the servant to take Poirot to the location. The parlor maid appeared and led him upstairs. I stayed behind with Mrs. Maltravers. It was difficult to know what to say. I tried a few polite remarks, to which she responded faintly and without focus. A few minutes later, Poirot returned.
Thank you for your kindness, madam. I believe there's no need to trouble you further. Just one more thing. Do you happen to know anything about your husband's financial position?
She shook her head and admitted she knew nothing. She described herself as completely ignorant of business matters.
I see. Then you can't tell us why he suddenly decided to insure his life. I understand he hadn't done so before.
She replied that they had only been married a little over a year, but he had been convinced he wasn't going to live much longer. He had a strong premonition of his own death. She believed he had already suffered one hemorrhage and knew another could be fatal. She had tried to calm his fears, but he wouldn't listen. Tragically, he had been right. With tears in her eyes, she bid us a quiet, dignified farewell. As we walked back down the driveway, Poirot made a small, expressive gesture.
Eh bien, that is that. Back to London, my friend. There seems to be no mouse in this mouse hole. And yet...
Yet what?
A slight discrepancy, that is all. You didn't notice it? No. Well, Life is full of little inconsistencies. Still, surely the man could not have taken his own life. No poison would produce blood at the lips. No. I must accept that everything appears to be clear and in order. But who is this?
A tall young man was walking swiftly up the drive toward the house. He passed us without acknowledging our presence. He had a lean, sun-darkened face that hinted at time spent in a tropical climate. Poirot spotted a gardener nearby, pausing from his work with the leaves, and hurried over.
Tell me, do you know that gentleman?
I don't recall his name, sir, but I did hear it once. He stayed here for a night last week, Tuesday, I believe.
Quick, my friend. Let's follow him.
We moved quickly after the man. As he rounded the corner of the house, we saw a black-robed figure on the side terrace. He changed course to meet her, and we witnessed the encounter. Mrs. Maltravers looked as if the ground beneath her had shifted. She almost staggered and turned pale as she whispered, shocked. She said, "You? I thought you were at sea, on your way to East Africa." The young man explained that some unexpected legal news had delayed his departure. His uncle in Scotland had died suddenly, leaving him a small inheritance. Given the situation, he decided to cancel his journey. Then he read the tragic news in the paper and came down to see if he could be of any help. He gently offered to assist Mrs. Maltravers in handling things around the estate. At that moment, both of them became aware of our presence. Poirot stepped forward with his usual courtesy.
1,000 pardons. I believe I left my stick in the hall.
Mrs. Maltravers, clearly hesitant, introduced the men. "This is Monsieur Poirot, Captain Black." They exchanged a few pleasantries, during which Poirot subtly learned that Captain Black was staying at the Anchor Inn. Unsurprisingly, the missing walking stick was not found. Poirot offered more apologies, and we took our leave. As we hurried back into the village, Poirot moved with rare urgency straight toward the Anchor Inn.
We'll stay here until Captain Black returns. Did you notice how I emphasized we were heading back to London on the first train? Perhaps you believed me. But no, look at her face, Hastings. Mrs. Maltravers was clearly shaken when she saw that young man. And he, bien, he seemed quite devoted, didn't he? And most importantly, he was here Tuesday night, the very night before Mr. Maltravers died. We must look into Captain Black's activities.
Roughly half an hour passed before we spotted Captain Black approaching the inn. Poirot met him outside, spoke briefly, and then brought him upstairs to the room we had taken.
I've explained to Captain Black the reason for our visit. You see, Captain, I'm trying to understand Mr. Maltravers' mental state just before his death, without causing undue distress to Mrs. Maltravers. Since you were here right before the tragedy, your observations could be very valuable.
I'm happy to help, of course, but I'm afraid I didn't notice anything unusual. Although Maltravers was an old friend of my family, I didn't know him all that well myself.
You arrived when exactly?
Tuesday afternoon. I left for London early Wednesday morning, since my ship was scheduled to sail from Tilbury around noon. But as I mentioned to Mrs. Maltravers, I received news that made me change my plans.
You were heading back to East Africa, correct?
Yes, I've been working out there ever since the war. Wonderful country.
I see. And what topics came up during dinner Tuesday night?
Oh, just general conversation. Maltravers asked after my family. We talked about German reparations for a bit. Then Mrs. Maltravers had lots of questions about East Africa. I told him a few stories. Nothing too remarkable.
Thank you.
Poirot went silent for a moment, then turned to Captain Black with a thoughtful tone.
With your permission, I'd like to try a small experiment. You've told us all your conscious mind recalls, but I'd like to explore what your subconscious might reveal.
Psychoanalysis? Really?
Oh no, nothing so heavy. This is very simple. I'll give you a word, and you just reply with the first word that comes to mind. Nothing more.
Black looked uneasy, but nodded slowly.
Hastings, please jot these down.
Poirot placed his large turnip-shaped watch on the table and began.
Day.
Night.
Name.
Place.
Bernard.
Shaw.
Tuesday.
Dinner.
Journey.
Ship.
Country.
Uganda.
Story.
Lions.
Rook rifle.
Farm.
Shot.
Suicide.
Elephant.
Tusks.
Money.
Lawyers.
Thank you, Captain. Would you be kind enough to return in about half an hour?
Of course.
He looked at Poirot with mild confusion and wiped his brow as he left the room.
Now, Hastings, do you see it?
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be seeing.
Let me help. First, his responses were prompt, meaning he's likely innocent of any direct involvement. Day to night. Name to place. All normal. I tested Bernard to see if he'd met the local doctor. He clearly hasn't. Then came Tuesday, and he said dinner because of our earlier conversation. But when I said journey, he replied with ship and for country. He said Uganda. That shows his mind is on the voyage he missed, not the trip to Marsdon Manor. When I said story, he thought of lions, which likely relates to something he shared at dinner. But look, Rook rifle led him to say farm, and shot brought suicide. Those aren't random. He's recalling a very specific story. I believe if we ask him directly, he'll confirm it.
And so he did. Captain Black admitted it without hesitation.
Now that you mention it, yes, I did tell him a story about a man who shot himself on a farm out in East Africa. Used a rook rifle through the roof of his mouth. Bullet lodged in the brain. Doctors couldn't figure out. Only sign was a bit of blood on his lips. But what does that have to do with Maltravers?
You didn't know. Mr. Maltravers was found with a rook rifle beside him.
You mean he copied that story? Oh, God, that's horrible.
Please don't be distressed. If not that way, perhaps another. But now, I must place a very important call to London.
Poirot spent a long time speaking over the telephone, his tone thoughtful and serious. That afternoon, he disappeared for hours, returning only by 7 in the evening. He looked at me and said quietly that he could delay it no longer. He must break the news to the widow. My heart went out to her completely. Losing her husband, discovering he had taken his own life just to ensure her financial safety, and now, possibly left with nothing. It was a burden too heavy for any woman. Secretly, I still hoped Captain Black might one day offer her comfort. Our conversation with her was agonizing. At first, she outright refused to accept what Poirot told her. But when the facts became undeniable, she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Poirot's investigation of the body left no room for doubt. Though he felt sympathy for her, his duty to the insurance company was clear. As we were preparing to leave, Poirot turned to her gently.
Madam, you of all people must know, there are no dead.
She looked at him, confused and wide-eyed, and said, "What do you mean?"
You've attended spiritual seances before, have you not? You're quite mediumistic.
She asked hesitantly. "I've been told that, but surely you don't believe in spiritualism?"
Madam, I've seen many strange things. You must know the locals say this house is haunted?
She gave a small nod just as the parlor maid entered to announce that dinner was served. Mrs. Maltravers pleaded softly, "Please, won't you stay and have something to eat?" We agreed. Perhaps our company might bring her a moment's distraction from all the grief. But then, something happened. Just as we finished our soup, a scream rang out from the hallway, followed by the crash of shattered china. We jumped up from our chairs. The parlor maid stood there, hand clutched to her chest. The parlor maid said, "There was a man standing in the passage." Poirot darted out and returned almost instantly.
There's no one there.
The parlor maid stood frozen, her face pale as she clutched her chest. In a trembling voice, she gasped that she had seen a man standing in the passage, and for a split second, she thought it was her master, Mr. Maltravers. It had looked just like him. Mrs. Maltravers visibly flinched. A chill ran down my spine. A suicide returning to his home? Could that old belief be true? Her thoughts must have run the same way, because just a moment later she clutched Poirot's arm in panic. Mrs. Maltravers cried out in a trembling voice. She asked if we hadn't heard it. 3 distinct taps on the window. That was exactly how her husband used to signal when he walked around the house. I said, "It was just the ivy against the glass." But fear had gripped us all. The parlor maid trembled, and when the meal ended, Mrs. Maltravers pleaded with Poirot to stay. We sat in the morning room. The wind had picked up, moaning around the house. Twice the door unlatched and creaked open by itself. Each time, she clung to me in fright.
This door is bewitched.
Frustrated, he got up and locked it.
There. It stays locked.
Mrs. Maltravers raised her voice in alarm, trying to stop Poirot. Don't lock it, she warned nervously. But her sentence trailed off, unfinished, as though she feared to say what might come next. And right then it did. The locked door slowly, silently opened. From my seat, I couldn't see the hallway, but Poirot and Mrs. Maltravers could. Her scream cut through the silence. Mrs. Maltravers cried out in panic and disbelief, her voice rising. You saw him. In the passage. You must have seen him.
Madam, I saw nothing. You're just overwrought.
Mrs. Maltravers was adamant, terrified beyond reason. With panic in her eyes, she cried that she had seen him, her husband, standing right there in the passage. Again and again, she insisted it wasn't her imagination. She knew what she'd seen. Before Poirot could respond, the room was plunged into darkness. The lights flickered and died. Then, from the hallway, 3 heavy knocks echoed. Mrs. Maltravers let out a trembling moan. And then I saw him. The figure that had once lain still upstairs now stood before us, bathed in a pale, ghostly light. Blood stained his lips. His right hand was extended, pointing. The light from that hand glowed brighter and brighter, until it fell on Mrs. Maltravers. Her face turned white as chalk. And then I cried, My God, Poirot! Her hand! Look at her right hand! It's red. Mrs. Maltravers looked down, saw it, and collapsed to the floor in a heap. Her eyes wide in horror as she stared at her own hand. In a frenzied voice, she confessed everything, sobbing that it was blood, that she had killed him. He had shown her how to hold a rifle, and she had pulled the trigger. Now, in her terror, she begged us to make him go away, crying out that he had come back. Her voice faded into hysterical sobs.
Lights.
And just like that, the lights returned, as if summoned.
That's it. You heard it all. Hastings, and you too, Everett. Oh, by the way, this is Mr. Everett, a rather talented man from the theatrical profession. I phoned him this afternoon. The makeup, don't you think, was excellent? Quite the image of the dead man. With a small pocket torch and some phosphorescent powder, he made a haunting impression.
Poirot glanced at my hand and added with a smirk.
I wouldn't touch her right hand if I were you, Hastings. Red paint stains easily. When the lights went out, I reached for her hand. That's when she thought the ghost was pointing at her. Oh, and we mustn't miss our train. Inspector Japp is waiting just outside the window. A nasty night, but he managed to amuse himself by tapping on the glass now and then.
As we stepped into the wind and rain, Poirot kept talking, his pace brisk, his mind razor sharp.
There was just one small discrepancy. The doctor believed Mr. Maltravers was a Christian Scientist, and who would have told him that if not the wife? But to us, she insisted her husband was obsessed with his health, convinced of his impending death. That contradiction bothered me. And then, her shock at seeing young Captain Black return. Odd, wasn't it? Finally, though society expects a woman to pretend to mourn her husband, I don't approve of tear-streaked cheeks covered in heavy rouge. Did you notice her eyelids, Hastings? No, of course not. As I always say, you see nothing.
I smiled wryly. He was right again.
There were 2 possibilities. Either the captain's story inspired Mr. Maltravers to take his own life, or it gave his wife a perfect method to stage a murder. I lean toward the second. Think of it. To fire a rook rifle through the roof of one's mouth, a man would likely need to use his toe to pull the trigger. And if he'd removed his boot to do so, surely someone would have noticed. An odd detail like that would never be overlooked. So yes, I believed it was murder, but I had no evidence. That's why I arranged the little theatrical performance you witnessed tonight.
I turned to him, still puzzled. I said, I still don't see all the steps in the crime.
Let's start from the beginning. A clever, calculating woman, trapped in a marriage with a man past his prime, financially ruined. She persuades him to take out a large life insurance policy. But then she needs a method.
And then, fate handed her the perfect idea. Captain Black's unsettling story of a suicide in Africa, done with a rook rifle, stayed with her. She filed it away waiting. The very next afternoon, believing the young captain was already at sea, she took a casual stroll through the grounds with her husband. Laughing softly, she brought up the tale again, wondering aloud if such a thing was really possible. Could a man truly shoot himself that way? He must have smiled, perhaps amused by her curiosity, and then, to demonstrate, the poor man positioned the rifle just as described, the barrel resting in his mouth. She leaned in close, placed her finger gently on the trigger, still pretending it was all a joke, and then she pulled it. And thus, the truth behind the tragedy at Marsdon Manor was finally unveiled, not by force, but by the little gray cells of one remarkable mind. Agatha Christie, the Queen of Crime, once again reminds us that even the calmest country estates may hide the darkest of secrets. And Hercule Poirot, sharp, precise, and ever so polite, shows us that it is not strength, but observation and order that truly bring justice. If this story intrigued you, moved you, or left you thinking, do let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you'd like more mysteries brought to life, filled with suspense, shadow, and intellect, support our journey by liking, subscribing, and sharing this story with fellow lovers of detective fiction. For the full experience, don't forget to listen with headphones. Until next time, stay curious, stay observant. You never know what secrets may be waiting just beneath the surface. This is Echoes of Stories, where mysteries echo beyond the final page.